It's a Manchu. Welcome to Minecraft Bedrock vs. Java, where I play both versions of the game and compare them. In my last video, I struggled to get a third wither skeleton skull. It was necessary to make a farm that will mean I won't be lacking in wither skeleton skulls ever again. Today, I will be making a wither skeleton farm. I like to build farms. For one thing, they're a great illustration of parity differences between Bedrock and Java, but I also like to make farms that I consider to be practical. Something you can make in an hour or two, something that works efficiently enough to be worth the trouble. A wither skeleton farm is bordering on the limits of practical. Not everyone needs a farm like this, but if you want to make more than just one or two beacons, it may be worth your time. I've experimented with different designs, including farms that don't require wither roses, but I found those to be too slow and unreliable. I'm not saying that what I came up with is the most efficient that you can make, but I'm trying to balance productivity of the farm with ease of making it to produce something as practical as I can make it. I'm starting off in my Java world. The first priority is to find just the right location to make the farm. I'm looking for another fortress in a soul sand valley. Only skeletons and ghast can spawn in this biome, and the limit for those mobs is very small. This means there aren't many mobs outside the nether fortress taking up the overall mob cap. I will have to spawn-proof as much of the fortress as possible, but not anything outside of the fortress. As for fortress mobs, yes, they only spawn inside the fortress, but what does that actually mean? Well, first of all, remember that I'm talking about Java Edition here. When I make this farm in Bedrock, I'll talk about how it's different. Another fortress, in Java Edition, has a bounding box that encompasses the entire structure. This is a huge area. The fortress mobs will spawn in any block in that area as long as it's nether brick. The fortress is made up of different structures, each of which has its own bounding box. Within that bounding box of each structure, fortress mobs will spawn on any block. It doesn't need to be nether brick. So for example, if I put a block of nether brick here, fortress mobs would spawn. It's inside the bounding box of the whole fortress. But it's not inside the bounding box of any of the individual structures, so fortress mobs will only spawn there if it's a nether brick block. The fortress is made up of different structures, each of which has its own bounding box. Within that bounding box of each structure, fortress mobs will spawn in any block. It doesn't need to be nether brick. Here's where wither roses come in. Mobs, as a rule, can't spawn on a block where they would take damage. If you plant a wither rose on a block, only wither skeletons are capable of spawning on that block. But you can't place wither roses on nether brick. So I have to place nether rock inside the bounding box of an individual fortress structure where fortress mobs can spawn on it, and put wither roses on the nether rack. I'm looking for a particular structure of the nether fortress. That is an open bridge intersection. This structure has a relatively large bounding box for its size, so I don't need to do much remodeling to make the farm there. It took some work, but I found what I believe to be an excellent location. A fortress with soul sand valley biome for hundreds of blocks in every direction. It has two open bridge intersections side by side, and it's mostly high above the ground. Unfortunately, the fortress is about 5,000 blocks from my nether hub. But it's not surprising that I have to search far from home to find just the right spot. Now that I've reached the site, I can already tell that blazes and wither skeletons are spawning in massive numbers. That's a good sign, but it's going to be a pain to set up the farm constantly under fire. I brought a chakra box full of fire resistance potions. This will help me deal with the blazes, but I'm going to have to get the mob population under control first by spawn-proofing the fortress, covering every block with moss carpet. You can use buttons or pressure plates or slabs or anything that will prevent spawns. I'm using moss carpet because it stands out, making it harder to miss a spot, and moss carpet is fire resistant. The bounding box for each fortress structure extends down 6 blocks from the top. If there's a structure low to the ground, some of the ground could fall into the bounding box of the structure and need to be carpeted as well. This part is going to be a little bit tedious. I'll get started and see you in a couple hours. This farm is ridiculous. I thought I had lots of wither roses, but I actually used probably about 9 stacks of them for the upper platform, the upper spawning platform. I didn't have enough to put wither roses on the bottom spawning platform, so I didn't bother that at all. That's all still carpeted with moss carpet. I'm getting so many wither skeletons so quickly, it's absolutely ridiculous. I have to pause every once in a while for the hoppers to catch up, because the hopper collection system I made, it just ain't quick enough. It hasn't been very long, I don't know how long, maybe a half an hour, and I have 34 wither skeleton skulls and all of these bones and coal. It's a stupendous amount. The only thing I didn't really consider, I don't really have a way to turn this off. So the wither skeletons are just going to keep coming and coming and coming, and there's nothing I can do about it. So that's the Java version of the farm done. And it was tedious and time-consuming, and a lot of spawn-proofing necessary, but boy, it works so well. Once it's set up, oh, it's glorious. Now I just have to do this in my Bedrock world. It uses completely different spawning mechanics, so the farm has different requirements, and I have to set it up quite differently. It's going to be even more difficult and tedious to do in survival mode, but I'll see what I can do. Now in Bedrock Edition, to make this wither skeleton farm, I'm looking for many of the same things as the Java version. A fortress in a soul sand valley, which is high above the ground. But I'm not looking for an open bridge crossing this time. All that stuff I said about fortress bounding box and structure bounding box doesn't apply in Bedrock Edition. Instead, fortress mobs spawn at specific locations in the fortress structure, which I call spawning locations. They are precise XYZ coordinates on the structures. So I want a structure in the fortress that has as many of these spawning locations as possible. And for that, I'm going to look for a corridor structure. Preferably somewhere where there's more than one corridor next to each other. Those will have the most spawning locations close together. The tricky part is to find those spots. As much as I try to do everything in survival mode, I had to make an exception for this part. So I made a creative world using the same world seed as my survival world, looked up on an online tool chunk base for likely fortress coordinates, and found the spawning locations in creative mode. So the way I do it is, here I have a couple of enclosed corridors side by side, so that's a good location right there. Break out all of the walls, and then I put down glass panes 2 blocks high across the entire surface. And of course I have to get rid of this moss carpet because I don't want the stuff to actually be spawn proofed. Now I end up with something like that. Now I just have to go away for a little bit and wait for something to spawn in. Now if I see regular skeletons or zombified piglins that spawn into here, that doesn't really mean anything because they could spawn anywhere, not necessarily need a fortress spawning location. But a blaze or a wither skeleton definitely has spawned at a fortress spawning location. So I know this thing has spawned by a fortress spawning location. When mobs spawn in, they spawn in on the northwest corner of a block. So I have to find which way is northwest. And a good way to do that is to use a sunflower, because the sunflower always faces east. So if that's east, then this is west, and this is northwest. That means that block there, that's where it spawned. It spawned on that block, that's the spawning location, because northwest of that is where it is. And that's how I find all the spawning locations. As much as I'd like to do things in survival mode, all my farms are built in survival mode, finding those spawning locations in survival mode would have been difficult. It would have been an ordeal, but I needed to do a proof of concept of this farm and test out different things in creative mode anyway. Over here, I've actually found 30 spawning locations and set up a farm here. Technically, I think it's 30. You notice right here, I've marked 2 spawning locations next to each other. This actually isn't possible one of these spawning locations is actually wrong. I made a mistake here. Probably that one's wrong. Probably that one's not correct, and this one is, because this spawning location is symmetrical with all the other ones I found here. I have replaced these 30 spawning locations nether brick with nether rack, so I could plant a wither rose on top of it. That's why in this farm, in Bedrock, I needed a lot less wither roses. I knew I was going to need less, because I'm not going to carpet the entire surface with wither roses. It's not necessary, as long as I find the actual spawning locations. On the northwest and northwest blocks to where the spawning location is, I have glass blocks here. This, in theory, should prevent blazes from spawning. Now, the pit trap that I made here is a 2x2, rather than the 1x3 design that I used in Java Edition, because I have a trident killer down here. It's a pretty conventional type of trident killer, and that requires a 2x2 hole. To get the withers to fall into that 2x2 hole, I had to place the piglin in a different position. I don't know if I mentioned this in the Java Edition design, but I'm using piglins that specifically have swords, not the ones that have crossbows, because I don't want them to shoot the wither skeletons. But this guy will be bait for all the wither skeletons within 16 blocks. The way this is arranged, pretty much everything is within 16 blocks, so as soon as the wither skeletons spawn, they'll be attracted to this guy. I have him sitting in a chest boat. That's something I've never used before, because this is a new feature of the 1.19 update. I always thought of it as something that you really only use early game. It's a boat with a chest in it. It gives you extra storage. But the use for it here is only one mob can fit in a chest boat. A normal boat, you could have 2 mobs in it. But this boat can only fit one guy. This piglin that's name tagged appropriately, Skelly bait. So nothing can get in the boat with it. Now, as I said, this is kind of proof of concept. The real design, I'm going to want to put this trident killer a lot lower down. What I did in the Java world, so that the bottom of the pit was far enough down, I put the bottom of the pit about 30 blocks down from the top. And that distance, the wither skeletons would normally die when they hit the bottom. I put a lava source right above the bottom of the pit, which slowed the wither skeleton's descent. I don't know if I made that clear before. I will do that when I build this in survival mode in Bedrock Edition 2. I'll put right above the trident killer itself a lava source to slow the descent of wither skeletons. The lava doesn't hurt the wither skeletons. It just will stop them from falling so fast. The collection system here, I have a couple of hopper minecarts, probably actually more than I need, and I have double hoppers here, which should be able to feed into this chest twice as fast as a single set of hoppers. So the items from this chest feed into this line of hoppers, which goes to 2 unstackable item filters that are in a row. Now, I'll try to put an image of this design up so you can see better what's going on here. This is a filter that will filter out all of the stone swords. I have 2 of them because in Bedrock Edition, filters that use hoppers are notoriously unreliable. But if I have 2 of them in a row, almost no stone swords are going to get through both filters into the chest here, where all the other drops go. I say that, but one of the stone sword got through. What should happen is the stone swords that get picked up by one of the filters and then dropped into this dropper here. And while I'm running the farm, I have the dropper continually dropping the stone swords into the lava below to get rid of those, because I really have no use at all for the stone swords. The other drops, I could sort them with an automatic sorter, but I'm not going to bother. So that's it. That's the farm in action. I kind of built this as a proof of concept just to see how well it works, and it appears to work really darn well. I was worried that, you know, because the mob cap is so much smaller in Bedrock Edition, it's 16 as opposed to 70 in Java, that I would have to spawn-proof the Soul Sand Valley around, but actually it turns out I don't really need to. I got a bunch of wither skeletons out there in the Soul Sand Valley, and it doesn't matter. I'm still getting plenty of wither skeletons spawning in here and giving me lots and lots of drops. So this should work. I just need to go into survival mode and do it. But the advantage of doing all this in creative mode first, because I use the same world seed, I know this location has a fortress. I know that the fortress will have the spawning locations for it in the same exact places in my survival world. So I can note all of the coordinates of these 30 spawning locations so that I don't have to go through finding them in survival mode. I've already done it. It's just the rest of the process that I have to do in survival mode. I was a little worried about how I was going to get the piglin because I have Soul Sand Valley all around for a long distance. In the Java world, it turns out that there was a Crimson Valley biome about 150 blocks away, which couldn't have been better. Wow, that was perfect. It's far enough away that it's out of range for mobs to spawn there, but it's close enough that it was fairly easy to get piglins there. But this particular fortress in Bedrock Edition is far from any other biome other than Soul Sand Valley. However, if I look this way, not too far, there's a piglin bastion remnant here that's full of piglins, which is perfect. Again, it's within sight of the fortress. I should be able to pick up piglins from here with swords in survival mode. I will have to worry about the piglin brutes, of course, but details. And then, like I say, I like to build these farms in survival mode because there's stuff like that that just aren't a consideration when you do it in creative mode that I'm going to have to figure out how to work around. Details that may seem minor when you're in creative mode, but in survival mode, it's kind of a big deal. So, now I have to gather some materials, find this location, which fortunately isn't too far from my nether hub, and get to work on it. After 2 hours of carpeting everything, I think I've covered everything to spawn-proof it. Now, I know where all these spawning locations are. I just have to mark them and start clearing space for the farm. Alright, I've marked down all the spawning locations. Now the next part I'm going to want to do is put a wall around this outside. Tear down the walls that are here. Some of these might interfere with spawning. Put a wall around the whole thing without being continually harassed by gas. And that's the trick. Ooh, also, how do I determine northwest? I did bring a sunflower with me. I believe there's another way. I've got out a map of the overworld. That's north. That's west. And another, the overworld locator map. Pointer still works. And I can tell that's west. That's north. Okay, let's get rid of him. There's a guy with a sword. He's the one I need. Alright, I got him in there. Alright, I think that'll do. Alright. Let's get this guy named. In Java Edition, if you put a mob in a boat, it's persistent. It will not despawn. Not so in Bedrock Edition, so I got to name tag this guy. And now he's name tagged. He won't go anywhere. I'm worried that the ceiling is going to block the view of the wither skeletons. I'm going to have to get rid of it, which means I'm going to have to start dealing with these gas becoming a problem for me. So I'm glad I did this in creative mode first, because it's hard to show. Everything's so packed in tight here in survival mode. Because I put it like below lava level, so I had to pack things in pretty tight. The dropper here is dropping stuff into that pool of lava there. It should destroy any of the stone swords. I have the dual sorters here. The filters to get rid of the stone swords. This switch activates the dropper. With that switch on, it locks the chain of hoppers that leads to the dropper, which isn't really a problem, because the dropper is going to be running as long as I have the farm going. And all the other items go into these chests here that aren't stone swords. I have a lava blade up above that, and that's a switch to activate the trident killer. I think there's just one thing left to do, and that's set up all the spawning spots. Alright, here goes nothing. I think we're set. I'll get out of here before the gas harass me anymore. My calculations are correct. It should start working anytime now. I must be missing something, because they're spawning like crazy here. And it's just not happening in my survival world. Why?
One eternity later.
Oh my god. I'm set to a sim distance of 4 chunks. I bet you that's it. I bet you that's it. Let's try that. I bet that makes all the difference. I feel like manipulating simulation distance, it feels like cheating to me, but if that fixes the problem, that's got to be what I do. Yeah. Yeah, that was it. Yep. Yep. That was it. Oh my god. I struggled. I can't tell you how much I struggled. I spent hours trying to fix this thing. And the farm hasn't been going too long, but it's, I'm accumulating a good amount of stuff. Now that I have this working wither skeleton farm in my Java world and my Bedrock world, I have to think of what I'm gonna do with these multiple stacks of wither skeleton skulls. Leave a comment if you have any ideas. I'm open to suggestions. I know this project took a long time to come out, but you have to understand, it took a long time because I had to test designs in a creative world in Java Edition, come up with one that worked, build the thing in survival mode in Java Edition, then test some designs in the Bedrock Edition world in creative mode, come up with something that worked, and then build one in Bedrock Edition. And these are big farms. They take some time to build. At least that's my excuse. But now I have to come up with something else to do. Something maybe that won't take 3 weeks to come up with. Next time on Amon Chooses Minecraft, Bedrock vs. Java.